Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains. Before we start, please leave a comment about where you are and when you heard the story. We want to know where these documented accounts come from and when they come in. In the Smoky Mountains, the fall of 1890 was colder than most people remember. The fog clung to the valleys like a shroud, and it wouldn't lift even when noon came. The forests were quiet, and the sounds of animals that were usually there were strangely quiet, as if the mountains were holding their breath. But for people who lived near the Carter property on Winding Creek Road, the quiet was caused by something more than the weather. Jedediah Carter, a 71-year-old widower from one of the first settler families in the area, owned the small cabin. The cabin itself wasn't anything special. It was a strong two-story building with a stone foundation, rough-hewn timber walls that had been weathered by years of storms in the mountains, and a steep roof that was made to keep heavy winter snows off. There was a covered porch around the front, held up by thick cedar posts, and a stone chimney on the east wall. There was a well about 50 yards into the woods behind the cabin. This well would later be the subject of a lot of speculation and fear. County records say that Obadiah Carter, Jedediah's father, built the property in 1837 when the area was still being settled. The houses were typical of those in the Appalachian Mountains. They were practical, strong, built to survive harsh winters, and offered simple comfort. Documents from that time say that the property was about 120 acres of forest and meadowland, with a small creek running along its eastern edge. Not long after the property was built, a well was dug behind the cabin. But strangely, a second well was built near the house about 10 years later, around 1847. The original well stayed, but local records show that it was no longer used. People who lived on Winding Creek Road often rushed past the Carter property, especially after dark. There was no clear reason for this behavior, at least not one that could be clearly stated. It was more of a feeling, a slight unease, as if something about the place was watching people who walked by. Wilbur Montgomery, a historian, talked to old people who lived in the area in 1958. They said that the property had a strange reputation even before Jedediah Carter went missing. Ezekiel Holcomb, a timber worker who brought firewood to many families in the area, said that place was always different, even when old Jed's wife, Cordelia, was still alive. There was something strange there. When I'd deliver wood, the air around the property had a smell, not common dirt, but something like wet clay and iron, even on the driest days. And Mr. Carter always met me at the property line, never let me come up to the house proper or near that old well. The official history, as written down in county records, was clear. After his wife Cordelia died in 1877, Jedediah Carter lived by himself. He didn't have any kids, so he spent most of his time taking care of the small apple orchard on his property and didn't go to the nearby settlement of Cad's Cove very often. He only went out in public once a month to get supplies at the general store and sometimes went to the Methodist church. He always sat in the back pew, alone, and left before the last hymn. The facts about Cordelia Carter's death seem to be well known, but there are some interesting inconsistencies. Dr. Silas Preston signed the official death certificate on the 18th of February, 1877. It said that the person died from respiratory failure caused by pneumonia, but a more thorough medical report found in the archives of the Knoxville Medical Society lists symptoms that don't really match those of pneumonia. The patient shows periods of extreme agitation followed by deep lethargy. She says she sees disturbing things and insists that there is something in the water that watches her. Her pupils stay dilated even in bright light, and her skin looks unusually pale. What is most troubling is that during her delirium, she sometimes speaks in a dialect that this doctor does not understand, which is unlike any mountain speech I have heard in 30 years of practice in this area. Jedediah Carter did not show up at the general store on the 23rd of October 1890 to get his monthly supplies. At first, no one thought this absence was very important. Some older people in the mountains had to stay inside because of health problems, or just chose to stay home during the first cold snaps of fall. But when he didn't show up until November, Reverend Amos Lawson sent his groundskeeper, Silas Beauchamp, to check on the old man's health. Reverend Lawson didn't often get involved in the lives of his church members, especially those who liked to be alone. According to his personal journals, preserved in the Regional Baptist Historical Society archives, he maintained a curious respect for Jedediah Carter, mixed with something that might be described as apprehension. In an entry from August 1889, he writes, "Spoke briefly with J.C. after service today. As always, his manner was formal and reserved, almost rehearsed. However, today, I noticed something different in his gaze, a feverish intensity that contradicts his usual composure. When I inquired about his health, he replied only that the nights have grown too quiet. At the conclusion of our conversation, he asked an unusual question. He wanted to know if I believed that the dead could return, not through divine intervention, but through the force of an earthly promise. I responded with scripture, naturally, but the question troubled me for the remainder of the day. What Silas found, or more accurately, what he did not find, would set off a chain of events that would leave a lasting mark on the region's collective memory, even though many would rather forget as the years went by. The sheriff's report from the 17th of November 1890, which was filed at the county seat and later moved to the State Historical Archives, says that Silas knocked on the cabin door for several minutes without getting an answer. He noticed that the door wasn't locked, just latched. The groundskeeper called out Jedediah's name and went inside. The inside of the cabin was spotless and well organized, as if it had been set up for guests. A half-empty cup of tea that had been sitting on a small side table in the sitting room for a long time was cold. There was no sign of a fight or disorder, and there was no sign of Jedediah Carter. Deputy Clerk Harlan Woodward wrote the sheriff's report while Sheriff Josiah Reynolds dictated it. The report describes the scene in a very clinical way, but it also includes a strange detail. The groundskeeper says that when he got to the house, he saw that all the clocks were stopped at exactly 3:27 a.m. This included the mantel clock in the sitting room, the pocket watch on the writing desk, and even the small bedside clock in the main bedroom. Mr. Beauchamp says that this detail made him feel very uneasy, but he couldn't say why. Silas looked through the cabin's sitting room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and storage room, but he couldn't find the owner. Later, he told the sheriff that he saw something strange near the old well. An old wooden box made of dark walnut, the kind used to keep important papers or keepsakes, was sitting open on the ground near the stone edge of the well. This was strange because Jedediah was known for keeping all of his things safe and locked up. The well itself needs a more in-depth description because its strange shape would later attract the attention of investigators. The well on the Carter property was built with care, unlike most wells in the area at the time, which were usually simple structures with stone walls that rose a few feet above ground level. The stones fit together so perfectly that there was no need for mortar, and the walls rose almost 4 feet above the ground. Thick oak planks made up the wooden cover, which was held in place by iron bands. It also had a small door that could be opened to get water without having to take off the whole cover. Most interestingly, some of the stones had symbols carved into them. Instead of initials or dates, they had complicated patterns that experts looked at years later said looked nothing like any local folk art style. Silas only found a leather-bound journal inside the wooden box. He quickly flipped through it and saw that the neat, precise writing was Jedediah's. But something in the last few pages of writing caught his eye. The handwriting got shakier and shakier, to the point where it was almost impossible to read. As if it had been written by someone who was very scared or stressed, the groundskeeper took the journal with him and went straight to Sheriff Reynolds to tell him that the old man was missing. People didn't know Sheriff Josiah Reynolds for being very interested in investigations. He was 62 years old and held the job more because of his political connections than his professional skills. He had been a cavalry sergeant during the Civil War and was made sheriff in 1882 after backing the winning side in a local election dispute. He didn't do very well at solving cases, especially when they involved families living in the mountains. The official investigation into Jedediah Carter's disappearance was short and not very thorough. Sheriff Reynolds searched the property and the woods around it for 2 days, but didn't find any sign of the old man. He decided that the old man had probably gotten lost and had an accident in the rough terrain. The case was put away, and the Carter cabin was locked up, waiting for possible heirs who never showed up. The investigation reports, though short, did mention something that didn't get enough attention at the time. Deputies found all of Jedediah's clothes and personal items in closets and drawers when they checked out the property. His metal lockbox held everything on his personal inventory, including valuable things like a gold pocket watch and a small collection of Confederate money that, according to witnesses, he cherished as keepsakes from his youth. A leather wallet with a lot of dollars in it stayed untouched in his desk drawer. If the old man really did leave on his own, he did so without taking any of his things or money. The journal that Silas found, though, was never added to the official case file. Sheriff Reynolds said he gave it back to the Reverend's groundskeeper, but the groundskeeper said he never got it back. For many years, no one knew where this document was. Then, in 1959, a carpenter named Abel Jenkins found a metal box hidden in a false wall while working on an old store building in Cad's Cove. Jedediah Carter's journal was inside the box, wrapped in a piece of black oilcloth. The carpenter kept the discovery a secret at first because he was superstitious and thought it might be linked to some strange religious practice. 2 months later, when Abel heard a casual conversation about the old mystery of the missing mountain man, he decided to tell his boss, shop owner Hiram Watkins, who then told the county historical society. At the time, Pastor Frederick Thornton was in charge of the Methodist Church in Cad's Cove. He took the document and, after reading it, decided to give it to the history department at the University of Tennessee. The journal was put in the restricted documents section of the university library, where it stayed for 6 more years without anyone being able to see it. The reasons for this have never been made clear. Pastor Thornton was a smart and organized man who had gone to seminary in Nashville. He didn't believe in superstitions or make unnecessary alarms. This makes the letter he sent to the Methodist bishop and his request to move the journal to the university even more interesting. In the letter, which is only partially preserved in the denominational archives, he writes, "Your Excellency will understand my hesitation in deciding the appropriate destination for this document. Its contents, especially in the final pages, raise questions that transcend the scope of our common theological understanding. I am not suggesting anything of a supernatural nature. I am, as you know, averse to such explanations. But there is, in these pages, a testimony to something profoundly disturbing that I believe should be studied by minds prepared for deeper psychological and historical analysis. What concerns me is not so much what is written, but the evident transformation in the person who wrote it. In 1965, Professor Douglas Merritt got permission to look at the document while he was doing research on the social history of the Smoky Mountains in the late 1800s. He was very upset by what he found in the yellowed pages of Jedediah Carter's journal. This made him stop his original research and focus only on this case. Douglas Merritt wasn't just a good historian. He was also a careful researcher with some training in psychology. He was born in Chattanooga in 1914 and worked for a short time in Army intelligence during World War II before focusing on his studies. His area of expertise was collecting oral histories and looking at personal papers like letters and diaries to piece together the social and mental aspects of different times in history. He was working on a big study of how the Smoky Mountain communities changed culturally at the turn of the century when he got Jedediah's journal. The first entries in the journal, which were written in March 1877, not long after Cordelia died, were boring notes about the daily life of a widower. They included lists of chores, records of expenses, and occasional thoughts on being alone and losing someone. The handwriting was neat and organized, which is how people who knew Jedediah Carter described him. An entry from April 1877 gives us a look at the widower's daily life and mental state at that time. April 12, 1877, Mr. Blanchard from the bank in Maryville came by today to talk about Cordelia's small inheritance. The papers are in order, as she always kept them. The cabin, the orchard, and the timber rights are still good assets that will keep me comfortable for the rest of my life. I am thankful for this, but I would give up all this material security for a few more years by her side. The nights are especially hard. The cabin seems bigger and emptier. Sometimes I wake up thinking I've heard her voice calling me from the kitchen, as she did when she got up early to bake. Dr. Preston suggested drops of valerian to help me sleep, but I hesitate. I prefer the clarity of pain to the confusion caused by medicine. The entries over the next few months were similar, showing how Jedediah slowly adjusted to being a widower. He talks about how his neighbors sometimes come over, how he makes decisions about how to run his orchard, and how he thinks about grieving. He doesn't want to change anything about the cabin or get rid of his wife's things, as if keeping the physical environment the same might keep her presence alive. The old well is mentioned for the first time in a strange entry from September 1877. September 18th, 1877. I needed to check the old well today after hearing strange sounds from that direction last night. I haven't been near it since Cordelia died. She always insisted that we use only the newer well near the house, though she never explained why she didn't like the old one. Strangely, I found the wooden cover slightly ajar, though I'm sure it should have been securely closed. The iron padlock, which has hung on the latch since Father's time, was unlocked and hanging open. I didn't dare to look down into the depths. I've never liked that well. Father built the second one closer to the house for convenience, he said. But I always suspected there was another reason. I secured the cover, locked the padlock, and now keep the key with me. Tomorrow I'll ask Abner from the neighboring farm to check if there's any external damage that might explain how the cover came open. But starting in August 1890, the tone of the entries started to change a little. Jedediah began to write down strange feelings, noises at night that he couldn't place, a constant feeling of being watched, and things that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. The 23rd of August 1890. I heard that sound again, like metal scraping against stone, coming from the old well. I asked Abner to look for animals, but he didn't find any. He said it might just be the stones settling, but why does it always happen at midnight? Abner Ledbetter lived next door and sometimes helped Jedediah with the harder work on the property. County employment records show that he stopped working on the Carter property in September 1890, saying he had found better work at a lumber camp further north. But when Professor Merritt found Abner's cousin Martha Ledbett in 1965, she told a different story. Abner never talked about that place or the old man. When we asked him why he had left a steady job nearby to work so far from home, he only said that there were things that money couldn't make up for. The night before he left for the lumber camp, I heard him tell his wife that the water from that place tasted like something that shouldn't be there. We never understood what he meant by that. Martha also told Professor Merritt something troubling that isn't in any official record. Her uncle, who had been healthy and strong, started to waste away soon after he left his job at the Carter property. She said, "It was like something ate him from the inside out. He lost weight, stopped eating, and had nightmares so bad at night that he screamed until he was hoarse." He died less than 3 months after leaving that place. Before he died, he talked about something that lived in the water and kept saying, "I shouldn't have looked, shouldn't have drawn water from that well." As September went on, the journal entries got worse and worse. Jedediah said that during the night he saw a dark figure standing at the foot of his bed. It vanished when he turned on the lamp. He said he heard whispering voices coming from the old well that spoke words he couldn't understand but that somehow seemed to be aimed at him. He wrote on the 3rd of October 1890, "I found that daguerreotype again at the bottom of my chest drawer, even though I know I buried it behind the woodshed 3 days ago. How is this possible? The picture looks different now. Her eyes seem to follow me around the room. Tomorrow I will burn it, and this time I will scatter the ashes in the creek." The journal doesn't say whose picture it had, and the photo in question was never found. Professor Merritt thought at first that Jedediah was talking about his late wife because he called the person in the picture her with a capital H, but later entries make this interpretation less likely. He writes on October 7, "I didn't sleep again. The sounds from the well continue, louder now, more insistent. They no longer sound like scraping, but like rhythmic tapping, as if someone or something were trying to communicate through a code. I've made the decision to inspect the old well tomorrow. The wooden cover has remained locked all these years. Perhaps there is something there that explains these phenomena. The key has been with me, kept in my pocket watch case since that day in 1877. Cordelia made me promise never to use water from that well, but she is no longer here to protect me from whatever is on the other side, And what if what torments me is precisely there? The entry for October 8th is short and scary. Today I went to the old well. The key was no longer in my pocket watch case, though I'm sure I left it there last night. I found it in the padlock, as if someone had put it there. The cover was slightly ajar, the smell coming from within. I cannot adequately describe it. A mixture of wet clay, mold, and something more, something metallic, like old blood or rusted iron. I didn't have the courage to open the cover completely or look inside. I locked it again and brought the key with me. Tonight, I will sleep with it under my pillow. On October 15th, Jedediah says he has the same dream for the third night in a row. In the dream, he stands in front of the well that he always keeps locked. He knows he shouldn't open it, but his hands move against his will. When the cover opens, he sees only darkness and feels an intense cold coming from inside. Then, from the depths of that darkness, he hears a voice, not Cordelia's, but the other one, the one that promised to come back. I am keeping my promise, the voice says, and then he wakes up, always at 3:27 inches the morning, with the feeling that someone is sitting on the edge of his bed. It's especially interesting that the other voice and the promise of return are mentioned, since there hasn't been any mention of such a promise, or who might have made it in the journal before. Professor Merritt spent a lot of time looking into whether there was anything secret or hidden about the old well on the Carter property. But when he finally got permission to look at the site in June 1965, he found out that the well had been filled in with stones and cement during renovations done in 1923, when a family of merchants from Knoxville briefly lived there. The Prescotts only stayed on the property for 5 months, which is a very short time given how much money they spent fixing up the cabin. Walter Prescott, the head of the family, was a successful businessman who had built a successful dry goods store. He was 48 years old in 1923 when he decided to buy a mountain retreat that would be both a summer home and a hunting lodge. The abandoned Carter property, which had been empty for years, was a good chance for him. Records from the time show that Prescott hired contractor Samuel Graves to oversee major renovations to the property. These included modernizations like adding indoor plumbing and a generator for electric lights. The contractor's notes, which are kept by the County Historical Society, contain an interesting detail. Client insisted on completely filling in the old well after incident with the workers. Suggested maintaining at least a portion for irrigation purposes given its substantial flow. But Mr. Prescott was adamant. "I want that hole sealed permanently," were his exact words. The official notes don't go into much detail about the event, but Professor Merritt was able to get some information from Samuel Graves's son, who had helped his father with the project. This source says that 2 workers who were cleaning up around the well took off the wooden cover because they were curious. They never fully explained what they saw inside, but both men quit their jobs that same day and refused to come back even when they were offered double pay. One of them, according to records, went to the sanitarium in Knoxville the next week. As October came to an end, the journal entries became less frequent and less complete. The writing started to look worse, with crossed-out words and stains that could be tears or spilled ink. There is a very disturbing entry on October 20th. "I can't sleep anymore. When I close my eyes, I feel her presence in the room. The walls are damp now, even though it hasn't rained. The moisture makes patterns that look like faces watching me. The smell, that same smell of wet clay and something else, something I know but can't name. I should have filled in that well when I had the chance. Now it's too late. Cordelia knew. She tried to warn me." The entry from October 22nd has an even more disturbing story. Someone, or something, has been moving around the cabin during the night. I hear the footsteps on the porch, though it's been cleared of fallen leaves. The creaking of the floorboards is unmistakable. Last night I gathered my courage to check. The front door was locked, as always, the key in my pocket, but upon placing my ear against the wood, I clearly heard breathing on the other side, heavy and irregular. More disturbing still was that as I stepped away, the breathing stopped abruptly, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. I returned to my bedroom and locked the door. In the early hours, I woke to the sound of scratching at my bedroom door. It wasn't like an animal trying to get in, but something deliberate. 3 slow scratches, followed by 3 faster ones, then a pause, and the pattern repeated. I remained motionless in bed, without the courage to check. The scratching continued for almost an hour, then ceased. In the morning, I examined the door. There were no visible marks on the wood. Jedediah makes a vague reference to something that happened in the past on October 22. I thought a lot about that night, the last time Cordelia seemed really clear-headed before the illness took over. She called me to her bedside late at night and made me promise never to use the old well, saying the water wasn't right. "What we did was wrong, Jedediah," she said. "I should never have asked you to do it, should never have made that bargain. I never knew what bargain she was talking about." Cordelia always kept her own counsel about some things. But I remember that in 1874, after returning from a visit to her cousin in Virginia, she changed. She became more reserved, spent hours staring at the old well. And occasionally I heard her speaking there, though I never saw anyone enter or leave our property. It was after this visit that she insisted we use only the newer well, officially because the water tasted better. Now I wonder what really lies at the bottom of that well. The last regular entry is from the 23rd of October 1890. Today I saw marks in the ground near the well, as if something heavy had been dragged toward it. I didn't go near it. I can't. But I know I have to face her eventually. The voices are louder now, almost clear enough to understand what they're saying. I think they're calling my name. Or maybe it's just the wind. Tomorrow I will go to Reverend Lawson. Maybe he can help. There is no proof that Jedediah ever looked for Reverend Lawson. The Regional Baptist Archives have a church attendance book that shows that his last service was on the 29th of September, 1890. But there is an interesting document in the Reverend's personal files, a handwritten note on nice paper that Jedediah Carter signed and dated the 23rd of October, 1890. "Reverend Lawson, I'm sorry I couldn't make it to our meeting today. Something unexpected came up that requires my presence at home. The issue I wanted to talk to you about has become more urgent than I thought. I ask for your prayers because I fear I'm facing something that goes beyond my understanding and maybe even the church's teachings. If we don't meet again in this world, know that I left at peace with my conscience, but not necessarily with what dwells in the depths of that well. May God protect you, Jedediah Carter." Reverend Lawson never mentioned this note publicly, and it was only discovered after his death in 1921 among his personal documents. There is a gap of almost a day without notes after the entry on October 23rd. Finally, on October 24, the day before his absence was first noticed, there is a last entry. The handwriting is hard to read because it is shaky and quick, as if it was written by someone who was about to break down. It's here with me in the cabin, not Cordelia, never was. The well cover is open now. I didn't open it. The sounds it makes as it moves across the floor. I can't stay any longer. But where do I go when she is everywhere? That daguerreotype, even the one I burned, has come back. The face in the picture has changed. It has. Her eyes now. I need to end this. There's only one way. This is the last entry in the journal that is easy to read. The last few pages are filled with random scribbles and what look like frustrated attempts to draw something, maybe a face or a symbol. There is a single sentence on the last page written in a surprisingly clear and firm hand. It was so different from the rest of the text that it made me wonder if it was written by the same person. Finally understood what she wanted from the beginning. Professor Douglas Merritt spent the next few years trying to figure out what really happened to Jedediah Carter and make a clearer timeline of events. In his research notebooks, which were found after he died in 1972, he puts forward a number of theories. Some of these are supernatural, which he himself dismissed as the result of a lonely old man's fevered imagination. Others are more ordinary, such as an intruder who tormented the old man, a distant relative who was interested in his property, or even a case of progressive mental decline that ended in flight or suicide. One aspect that most intrigued the professor was the coincidence between the recurring time in Jedediah's dreams, 3:27 a.m., and the fact that all clocks in the cabin were found stopped at that same time. This coincidence made it seem like something important happened at that exact time, maybe the night before he went missing. Merritt's notes also mentioned something else that bothered him: the last sentence of the journal. The handwriting in that last entry was so different from the rest that it made people wonder if it was real. Was it possible that another person had written that line, and if so, who and what would be the meaning of that understanding mentioned? One of the most intriguing aspects that Merritt discovered during his investigation was the death certificate of Cordelia Carter. According to the official document, she died of natural causes on February 18, 1877. The professor did find a report in the archives of the local doctor, Dr. Silas Preston. That gave more information, though. Before she died, Cordelia had a strange illness that made her see things that weren't there and made her body very weak. Dr. Preston, the doctor who was there, said that the patient often talked about something waiting in the water and said she had made a promise that she couldn't break. The doctor also said that Cordelia wouldn't drink water from either of the property's wells. Instead, she only drank rainwater that she collected herself in a barrel. Merritt found this medical report from the 15th of February, 1877, to be especially useful because it included more information. The patient alternates between periods of lucidity and episodes of extreme agitation. During the clear moments, she expresses a rational and consistent fear related to a bargain she claims to have made during her visit to relatives in Virginia in 1874. Though reluctant to provide specific details, she mentioned having acquired an old object from a peddler in Richmond, an object she now keeps hidden in a locked box that she refuses to show me. More concerning is her insistence that this object has changed since being brought to their home. Mrs. Carter, a woman of education and respectable social position, does not strike me as given to superstitions. Yet she describes with disturbing conviction that the object speaks to her through the water and that it promised to fulfill her wish in exchange for something precious. In the past 48 hours, her physical condition has deteriorated significantly. She presents permanently dilated pupils even under intense light, abnormally low body temperature, and a peculiar odor emanating from her skin that does not correspond to any pathological condition known to this physician. There are also inexplicable marks on her wrists and neck, similar to bruises, but with a regular pattern that suggests more a deliberate contact than accidental injuries. As a medical professional, I must record only observable facts, but I confess that this case defies my scientific understanding. If I were a man of lesser education, I might suggest that Mrs. Carter is under some form of malevolent influence. As I am not such a man, I limit myself to documenting her condition and administering the prescribed sedatives to alleviate her suffering, though I fear the outcome may inevitably be fatal. 3 days after this report was written, Cordelia Carter passed away. The death certificate, which was also signed by Dr. Silas Preston, says that the person died of heart failure and does not include any of the disturbing details from the hospital report. Professor Merritt also talked to a number of older people who lived in the area as part of his research. One of them was Millicent Beauchamp, who lived about a mile from the Carter property in 1890 when she was 17 years old. According to Millicent's testimony, recorded in 1965, in those days, nobody talked openly about Old Man Carter's place, but everyone knew there was something strange there. My mother forbade me from walking past that property alone on full moon nights. Sometimes we would hear sounds coming from there, not screams nor exactly voices, but a kind of low lament, like someone humming a sad melody. On the morning they discovered he had disappeared, I was returning from delivering eggs to the Holcomb family and saw something I never told the authorities. I saw a woman leaving the property very early, before the sun had even risen. She wore a long, dark dress that covered her completely and a shawl that shadowed her face. She carried something in her arms wrapped in a dark cloth. At the time, I thought it might be a midwife who had been called during the night. But now thinking about it, why would a midwife leave carrying something instead of attending to her duties and then departing empty-handed? This testimony makes me worry about what happened that morning. Who did Millicent see? What did she have with her? And why didn't the official authorities get this information? Professor Merritt writes in a note after the interview with Millicent, "The description of the woman seen by M.A.B. curiously corresponds to reports of a strange visitor who was occasionally seen visiting the Carter property in the months preceding Jedediah's disappearance. Silas Beauchamp says that this visitor never told anyone who she Bosettin was, always came near dusk, and Jedediah would meet her at the edge of the property and lead her to the old well, not the cabin. The groundskeeper said she was a tall, thin woman who always wore dark clothes and a shawl that hid her face." Could it be that the same person was somehow involved in both Jedediah's disappearance and the events surrounding Cordelia's death 13 years earlier? The Carter property stayed empty for a long time after Jedediah went missing. In 1923, Knoxville businessman Walter Prescott bought it and did a lot of work on it before moving in with his family. It's interesting that the Prescotts lived on the property for only 5 months before suddenly moving away and selling the cabin for much less than what it was worth on the market. When asked why he moved, Walter Prescott is said to have only said that the place wasn't good for a family that wanted peace of mind. Walter Prescott, who was 90 years old and living in Nashville at the time of the interview with Professor Merritt in 1965, was very unwilling to talk about his short time living on the Carter property. He only agreed to give some information after a lot of pressure, and only if the conversation was not recorded. Merritt's notes say that Prescott told her that the family was excited about their new mountain home in the first few weeks after they moved in. The renovation was very thorough. It brought the cabin up to date without losing its historical charm. However, Prescott reportedly said, after about a month, strange things started happening. At first, they were small things that disappeared and reappeared in different places. Strange sounds coming from the filled-in well, like scratching or rhythmic tapping. My wife complained of a persistent smell in the main bedroom, a smell of wet clay and something metallic that no amount of cleaning could get rid of. We replaced the floorboards, checked the plumbing, and even took down part of the wall covering, but the smell always came back. Prescott says that the event that finally pushed them to move happened on a night in June 1923. His wife woke up screaming, saying she had seen a dark figure standing at the end of their bed. There was no one there when Prescott turned on the lamp. They did find something that didn't belong to them on the dresser, though, a small wooden box with a single daguerreotype in it. Prescott said, "It was a picture of a woman sitting in a chair. Behind her was something like a shadow, but with a vaguely human shape. The woman's eyes were the most disturbing part. They were completely black, like holes in the picture. I knew right away that it was Cordelia Carter, whose picture I had seen in county records when we signed the purchase papers. On the back of the picture was a phrase written in faded ink. She lives in the water and wants company." The next day, Prescott hired people to pour more concrete over the well that had already been filled in. A week later, the family left the cabin and never came back, even to get back things they had left behind. Over the years, the property changed hands many times, but no one stayed there for more than a year or two. The cabin had been empty for almost 10 years when it was finally torn down in 1949 to make room for what would later become part of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. According to a report in the Knoxville Sentinel on the 12th of August, 1949, the workers found something strange while tearing down the building. They found a small metal box buried in the concrete when they took off the concrete seal over the old well. Luther Hayes, the foreman, chose to open the box. Inside were a small old locket, a tarnished silver thimble, and a daguerreotype. The newspaper article doesn't say what was in the picture, only that it was given to the police. But there is no record of this picture in the county's archives from that time. An interview Luther Hayes gave to Professor Merritt in 1965 is the only clue we have about what it might be about. I'll never forget that picture. It was of an old man, probably Jedediah Carter, sitting in a chair. Behind him was a tall, thin woman, with her face mostly in shadow. What bothered me the most was the old man's eyes. They were completely black, as if someone had painted over them with ink. There was a message on the back of the picture, but it was so faded that I could only make out a few words. Kept promise beneath water. Hayes also told the professor something he hadn't told the press at the time. They found what looked like a small bone carving with strange symbols etched into it next to the picture. The carving looked like a vessel or a well. Hayes admitted that the discovery upset him when he was asked what happened to the object. That same night, he threw both it and the metal box into the river. He only gave the police the picture, which might have something to do with the old missing person case. In January 1972, Professor Douglas Merritt died before he could finish his research on the Jedediah Carter case. He gave his notes and other materials to the university library, but for some reason, a lot of this collection went missing during a reorganization of the archive in 1968, leaving only a few field notebooks and letters. The library management said that an administrative mistake caused the documents to go missing, which is funny because it is similar to how Jedediah's original journal went missing from police records. But Margaret Thornton, the professor's assistant who had helped organize the materials before they were given away, didn't believe this explanation. We carefully put together all the case materials. There were more than 8 notebooks of notes, pictures of the property before it was torn down, copies of official documents, transcripts of interviews, all neatly organized in 3 archive boxes with clear labels. The professor was very organized. There's no way that all this material could have been lost because of a simple bureaucratic mistake. Merritt writes about a disturbing personal experience in one of the other notebooks, which is dated July 1965. After months of looking into the case, he started having trouble sleeping and hearing strange noises in his own home. For example, he heard scratching in the walls, footsteps in the hallway when he was alone, and the creak of a rocking chair in his study, even though he didn't have such furniture. In his last note about the case, he wrote, "I dreamed about him last night. Jedediah Carter was standing by the old well, its cover open. He looked directly at me and said, 'You too have made a promise, Professor.' When I woke up, I found an antique thimble on my desk that looked just like the one in the demolition report. I don't know how it got there. My house was locked. Tomorrow I will end this research. There are questions that should not be answered, mysteries that should remain buried. Jedediah Carter understood this too late. I still have time." After this event, Professor Merritt officially stopped working on the Jedediah Carter case and went back to his earlier work on the social history of Tennessee. He didn't talk about it much, and when people asked him about it, he said he had lost interest in the story. His assistant, Margaret, wrote down an interesting detail. The professor insisted on burning all of his notebooks about the case that he still had in his possession. The assistant also said that he acted differently after he stopped doing the research. He started to avoid working after dark, put in more lights in his house, and became almost afraid of being in small spaces like cellars and attics. No one knows what really happened to Jedediah Carter in October 1890. They never found his body, and there was no solid proof of a crime. His case is still listed as a disappearance in official records. Raymond Mitchell, a journalist for the Knoxville News-Sentinel, tried to reopen the case in 1958 because he was interested in the urban legend that had grown up around the well behind the Carter cabin, as it was known in the area. He was able to find and talk to Silas Beauchamp, the Reverend's groundskeeper, who discovered the empty cabin in 1890. Silas, who was 86 at the time, showed signs of senile dementia, but when he was clear-headed, he told Mitchell something he had never officially said. "When I walked into the cabin, I knew something was wrong right away. It wasn't just the silence, or the fact that the old man wasn't there. It was like the house was breathing. The walls seemed to pulse like a heart, beating very slowly. There was a smell, not of death or illness, but of freshly dug clay and candle wax. The strangest thing was what I found in his bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, as if no one had slept in it. On the pillow was an antique key, big enough to be the key to the well cover, and next to it, almost invisible against the white sheet, were small stains of a dark liquid that I hoped was ink." Silas also told the reporter something he had left out of his police report in 1890 because he was afraid of being seen as superstitious or mentally unstable. "I went to the well to see if Jedediah might be there, and I saw that the wooden cover, which he always kept locked, was slightly open. The strong smell of wet clay came from inside. I was scared to go closer, but something made me look. What I saw in the depths. I don't know how to explain it properly." The well wasn't dry, as it should have been after years of not being used. There was water, dark water, and it seemed to move in a way that water shouldn't move. Not like ripples from a stone, but like something circling below the surface. I didn't stay to investigate. Something about that place made me feel instinctively scared, something I can't explain. I closed the cover, ran back up the path, and never went back to that property. Raymond Mitchell's article about the case came out in the Knoxville News-Sentinel on a Sunday in August 1958, but it didn't get the attention he had hoped for. The story had become just another urban legend in a region full of them. Mitchell quickly moved on to other topics, and the mystery of Jedediah Carter faded back into the background. Mitchell's sudden death just 4 months after his article came out is a disturbing coincidence that hasn't been made public. The death certificate says he died in his sleep at the age of 45 from a heart attack. However, a co-worker at the newspaper told Professor Merritt that Mitchell had become more and more paranoid in the weeks leading up to his death, saying he heard strange sounds in his apartment and felt like he was being watched all the time. He also said that he had found an old thimble on his desk, like the one described in the report about the well demolition, but he didn't say how he found it. The site of the Carter cabin is now part of a hiking trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Sometimes, rangers hear hikers talk about strange things that happen in that area, like a sudden drop in temperature, the sound of water flowing where there isn't a stream, and the smell of wet clay that seems to come from the ground. Robert Jenkins, the current head ranger, has worked in the park since 1964. He says that these things happen more often at certain times of the year, especially in late October when Jedediah went missing. He said, "It's something that anyone who works this trail for any length of time eventually notices. It's not scary, it's more uncomfortable, like you're never really alone in that part, even when no one else is around." Some rangers won't patrol that area alone, especially at dusk. I don't know why specifically at dusk, but that's when the strange things seem to happen the most. The air gets heavier, like before a storm, and there's that smell of wet clay, which is an earthy smell with a hint of something metallic. And sometimes, just for a second, you feel like you see someone out of the corner of your eye, usually near where the well used to be. When you turn, there's no one there. Park workers found a small silver thimble with the initials C engraved inside while they were working on the trails in 1964. It was buried in the ground. The object was given to the Regional Historical Museum, where it is still on display as a reminder that some secrets don't fade with time. Elizabeth Harmon, the museum curator in charge of cataloging the piece, told a strange story about the thimble. She said that on the first night after the item was put on display, the museum's security system failed for no apparent reason at 3:27 a.m. and stayed down for exactly 7 minutes. The thimble had moved inside its display case and turned 180 degrees when the system started working again. The technicians looked at the system and couldn't figure out why it failed. What really happened to Jedediah Carter on that mountain property in 1890? Was he the victim of a crime that happens a lot to people who want to steal their small amount of money? Did he go crazy and kill himself? Or run away? Or is there something more sinister about this story that official records and logical explanations can't fully explain? The last words he wrote in his journal that were easy to read say, "Finally understood what she wanted from the beginning." What did he mean by this late understanding? And who or what was she? Professor Merritt's final notes on the case give an interesting point of view. After months of investigation, I find myself contemplating possibilities that my academic training hesitates to accept. The patterns are undeniable. The black eyes in the photographs, the persistent smell of wet clay and metal, the sounds near the well, the specific time, 3:27 a.m., that appears repeatedly, the sensation of being watched, the progressive mental deterioration of those who delve into the mystery, and most disturbing, the shadowy figure described consistently by witnesses separated by decades. There is an element in this case that resists conventional explanations, something that seems to persist beyond the demolition of the cabin, beyond the death of the original witnesses, beyond even time itself. Like an echo that refuses to dissipate, or a presence that has found a way to transcend the physical boundaries that should contain it. I dare not fully articulate what I suspect, but the last phrase in Jedediah Carter's journal finally understood what she wanted from the beginning, continues to resonate. What did he comprehend, and why did this understanding coincide with his disappearance? There exists an old concept in Appalachian folklore, rarely discussed openly, called the Water Witch, a being that is not exactly human, that makes bargains, grants wishes, but eventually returns to collect a payment far more valuable than the beneficiary initially realizes. Is it possible that Cordelia Carter, during her mysterious visit to Virginia in 1874, encountered something of this nature, something that she brought home, confining it to that old well, only to discover too late that some entities cannot be truly contained? Pure speculation. Naturally, the most probable explanation remains a conventional crime or a tragic case of mental instability. However, I cannot ignore the chill I feel when rereading the accounts, nor the persistent sensation that in investigating this mystery, I have attracted some form of unwanted attention. Some stories have no definitive conclusion, only echoes that resonate through the decades, reminding us that not all mysteries were meant to be unraveled. The case of Jedediah Carter is one such echo, a whisper from the past that even after more than 70 years still makes us look with suspicion at old wells and dark waters, wondering what might be hidden beneath the surface. And if, by chance, you find yourself hiking the trails of the Great Smoky Mountains at dusk and feel a sudden chill, as if you're being watched, if you detect a vague scent of wet clay in the air, perhaps it's merely coincidence. Or perhaps it's a reminder that some presences never truly depart. Some promises, once made, are impossible to break. There exists an old saying in the mountains, not all stories end when a person dies. In the case of Jedediah Carter, it seems the story only began with his disappearance, and perhaps, in some sense we don't fully comprehend, it continues to this day. And you, who now know this story, have you checked the water in your home today? Have you paid attention to what might be looking back at you from its dark surface when all is quiet? And if, by chance, you wake at 3:27 inches the morning, perhaps it would be wise to avoid looking toward any source of water in your room. Some things, once seen, cannot be forgotten. Some stories, once known, become part of us. As the old mountain folk used to say, knowledge is power. But some knowledge is also a burden, and some wells, once opened, can never truly be sealed.